one of the hardest questions to answer, and a question that I get quite often, is which tarot deck do I choose? So I've literally put out all of my tarot decks. They barely fit on this table. My camera is as zoomed out and as high as I can put it. And yeah, these are my tarot decks. And I wanted to talk today about the different types of tarot decks as far as I understand it, because there's a lot more that I don't have, and there's probably a lot that I don't have experience with. So we're just going to talk about, from my personal experience, the difference between different tarot decks and how to choose the deck that is right for you. So to start off, I'm just going to tell you what all the different decks are that I have. Okay, we have the Fountain Tarot, the Wisdom Seekers Tarot, which you can't even see. I'm pointing off. Am I pointing off the screen? Down here in the bottom. Wisdom Seekers Tarot, Rider Tarot, Animal Totem Tarot, the Nightmare Before Christmas Tarot, the Green Witch Tarot, Gilded Tarot, Steampunk Tarot, Halloween Tarot, Best Tarot, Antique Anatomy Tarot, Herbcrafter's Tarot, and the Wildwood Tarot. So there is a bit of a theme here, right, with these cards, because I myself, I love to work with animals, I love to work with herbs, I love history, and I'm also a bit of like a Halloween horror kind of person. I love that kind of stuff. So my tarot collection really reflects that. There are some people who would look at this collection and go, I don't want a single one of those cards. And that's perfectly okay, because we all have different tastes, right? I describe myself as a hedge witch, and that encompasses, you know, the green witch aspects. It encompasses the herb crafting, it encompasses the animals, it encompasses the home, and I feel like this kind of reflects that. So these cards really kind of reflect who I am and my interest. So your cards should do the same for you. I'm not saying that these are the cards that you need. These are the cards that I wanted. So let's start by going through these and getting some of them off the table. First, we're going to start. This is the traditional Rider Tarot deck. It is the Rider Waite Smith deck, based on the artwork of Pamela Coleman Smith. Very typical, or the usual imagery. You can find Rider decks that have different coloring, different themes. Like I've seen, what is it? There's like a neon version of it. Now I am not into neon colors, so, but you know, if that's your jam, then that works too, right? So the tarot is the Rider Waite Smith tarot decks are kind of the industry standard for messages and for the symbolism used on the cards. Okay. The Gilded Tarot is also a Rider Waite Smith themed deck. So if you look at these cards, the imagery on them is very similar to the Rider Waite Smith deck. So it's got the two dogs, it's got the lobster, the two towers, the moon, right? There's the king, high priestess, same two towers with the woman. The pages, they're in very similar poses, very similar symbolism amongst these cards, but they look very different, right? This one, the chalice with the eye and the moon phases. I like these cards because, well, what drew me to these cards is that they were dark. I liked how the black border, and I liked the saturation of the pigment in the cards. We have the Best Tarot, and this was literally designed by having people look at Rider Waite Smith cards and then trying to draw the card from memory. So exactly the same imagery, just with a whole bunch of different artists. And all of these decks, or at least most of them, I have done reviews for, so I will leave the review playlist up in the corner. Okay, let's see, from there, let's go to the Wisdom Seekers Tarot. And I like to store all of my tarot cards in their original boxes. You don't have to. Lots of people don't. Some people make bags for them. Some people just keep them like this on a shelf. But this deck has very similar imagery, but it also does have pip cards. So there's not much in terms of symbolism besides the 4 pentacles. Some of them are very highly detailed, and other ones are not as detailed. I love the artwork on these cards, and the just the way that the illustrations are done really drew me to these cards. I typically use these ones as a majors deck. I'll pull out the majors and just use those because some of the minor imagery doesn't really resonate with me, and that's okay. Sometimes you will find cards that don't resonate with you. I choose to keep them, but you could always resell them, you could gift them. You know, you don't have to keep cards that you don't like. Just because you bought them doesn't mean they need to stay with you, right? So that is the Wisdom Seekers Tarot, again, based on predominantly Rider Waite Smith imagery with some pip cards as well. Speaking of pip cards, we have some as well in the Nightmare Before Christmas tarot deck. So I am a huge Tim Burton fan. I love The Nightmare Before Christmas, and when I saw that they were making this deck, I just had to have it, right? So a lot of the cards they're not Rider Waite Smith themed because they're using the Nightmare Before Christmas imagery, but they're still using the same terms as the Rider Waite Smith. So we still have the Wheel of Fortune, we have the Tarot, we have the Moon, but it's not the same as we've seen in the past. You know, like here's the Hanged Man. Typically in a Rider Waite Smith deck, the Hanged Man is upside down. Okay, we also have, in this deck, we have needles, candles, gifts, and potions. So here we have a pip card, which basically just shows the potions versus the imagery. 10 of Candles is another pip card. The 3 of Needles kind of is combining the imagery of the Rider Waite Smith, but really minimally. Like it's very minimal in its design is what I mean. These are beautiful cards, and if you are a fan of The Nightmare Before Christmas, these might be something that you want to look into, especially if you know the story. Knowing the story and the characters helps to give you a little bit more insight into what the artist and author were trying to depict as they created those cards. On the Halloween theme, I have the Halloween Tarot. And these use different terminology. So we have pumpkins, ghosts, imps, and bats. But a lot of them are still very similar to the Rider Waite Smith imagery. Some are completely different, like this Moon card. Some are kind of pips, which like this 8 of Imps, the Chariot. But if you look at this Knight of Ghosts cards, very similar to Rider Waite Smith imagery. Same with the Queen of Pumpkins. This is the Queen of Pentacles, and the imagery is very, very similar. So this is kind of combining their own imagery with Rider Waite Smith imagery. And then let's go on to, we'll get these small decks out of the way. This is the Fountain Tarot. And this deck actually has an extra card. It is the Fountain, which I'm probably not going to be able to find because, you know, I didn't think ahead to look for it. But you can see there's beautiful imagery on these cards. And while they use the same themes and kind of inspiration as the Rider Waite Smith, like there's the Queen of Cups, completely different imagery. But you still can understand the themes that are presented in Rider Waite Smith decks. Like here's the moon, very similar. We do have the outline of the two dogs. We have the towers, we have the moon. But again, this does have the extra card, which is always fun when it, oh, there it is, the Fountain with the infinity symbol. I love when that card comes out because it truly means that there's something special going on. So again, but this kind of imagery, it's a lot more interpretive. It's not as jam-packed full of imagery as a Rider Waite Smith deck is. There's a lot of artistic license taken with this, and just artistically, this is a very beautiful deck. So something like that might call to you as well. This is actually one of my more expensive decks as well. You saw like the gilding on the side. It's very fancy. Okay, let's go with the Wildwood Tarot. This is a deck that I use on this channel so often. Oh, one thing I do want to mention, which is reminded of this deck, is that sometimes the Strength and the Justice cards are flipped. Their numbers, depending on the artist and the creator, just because there's some debate about the actual order of those cards and how it progresses in the story of the major arcana. So this is one of the decks that the Justice card, I believe is what it is. The Justice card is number 8 and Strength is number 11, I want to say. Yeah, the Woodward is number 11 and the Stag is number 8. But a lot of these decks that use different terminologies, like this doesn't have the typical terminology, like we have the Wanderer instead of the Fool. But I believe these, do they say? Maybe it doesn't say that this is the Fool. I thought it had a list somewhere about what the translation was. I guess not. Oh well, doesn't really matter. This may be a harder deck to use simply because it doesn't use the same terminology as the Rider Waite Smith deck. This also does have little notes. So it's got the 7 of Bows, clearance, 2 of Vessels, attraction, 10 of Stones, home, Ace of Bows, spark of life. And then we have, where are some majors? So we have balance, which is the temperance card. We have moon on the water, which you can see that is not similar to Rider Waite Smith imagery at all. We have the forest lovers. We have the hooded man. We have the journey. I love that card. The journey versus the death card. There's also the world tree, the shaman versus the magician. So this deck still uses very similar themes, but it has its own interpretation. It has its own words. It has its own kind of sense of guidance. And now this is a wonderful guidebook, which you can look at as well. And this, just because of my love of nature, this really drew me to it. I really love the imagery on this cards, and I find I really connect with this deck. So even though it is different than a typical Rider Waite Smith deck, I find this deck, for me personally, very easy to read. But again, that will be different for all of us. Let's go in, let's do the Steampunk Tarot actually next. So this card is kind of similar, these cards are kind of similar to the Wildwood Tarot in the fact that they have different terminology, and it's also very heavily theme based. So this is all about steampunk. So we've got submersibles, we've got the brazen head, we've got leviathans, we've got the inventor, leviathans, engines, the time machine, airships. So airships, leviathans, submersibles, and engines are the minor arcana. And then we've got the navigator of airships, we've got the messenger, we've got the captain, and we've got, what's the other one? Messenger, captain. I haven't read this deck in a while. Probably not gonna, oh, and the lady. That's what the queen is the ladies. So we've got Cosmic Blueprint. Here's the Fool card, but in this deck it's called the Apprentice. And you can see the information presented in this card, the symbolism, is completely different than a Rider Waite Smith deck. But these cards, again, they're all so beautiful. So if you really like kind of a Victorian aesthetic, if you like steampunk, if you like machines, this might be something that you are interested in. If you like the combination of the past with technology, like this might be a good deck for you. I find the imagery on that deck to be so incredibly beautiful. Where do we go next? Let's go the Antique Anatomy Tarot. Now, if you don't like anatomy, fair warning, this does have bones and stuff on it. These cards do use the same terminology as the Rider Waite Smith for the major arcana, but different for the minor. So we have the Hanged Man, we have blades. This is the Temperance card. We have elixirs. Whoops. So we have blades, elixirs, rods, and coins in this deck. So here's the Emperor card. And these are these are gorgeous cards. I love these cards. These cards I find I don't get messages as quickly from, so I tend to use them more in personal readings when I'm really allowing myself to sit and contemplate the cards. It would take a long time to get all the messages across doing these on YouTube. Sometimes I do it, but not often because it's just not as quick of a read for me. Here's the High Priestess, rods, the King of Elixirs, the Eight of Coins, the Ace of Coins, the Moon. So you can see there's a whole bunch of imagery on these cards, but it is nowhere near what a Rider Waite Smith deck is, if that's what you're used to using. Or again, also when you're picking a deck, if you pick a deck like this, you're gonna have to go off the guidebook for any information. And this guidebook is amazing. It's very concise, but lots of information and lots of great interpretations for the cards. But if you go with a deck that is more based off of the Rider Waite Smith symbolism and imagery, there are countless books that you can get from your library, from Amazon, from whatever bookstore that can walk you through all the symbolism. Something like this, or the Wildwood Tarot, or the Steampunk Tarot, even this Herbcrafter's Tarot. It's not gonna line up in the same way. So that's something to keep in mind. The closer you are to a traditional Rider Waite Smith deck, the more resources you will have at your disposal as to how to read that deck. So since we just mentioned this one, we'll go to the Herbcrafter's Tarot. Again, all these tarot books, or all these tarot decks, come with beautiful guidebooks. So these cards are all about herbs, and so it uses the elements. So we have earth, air, fire, water as the minors, and then we have the typical majors. So we have like the lovers, but its association is an herb. Actually, all of them have an associated herbs. Like the 10 of fire is comfrey, the 4th lovers is hawthorn, the 2 of earth is witch hazel. We have the world, which is Pachamama. You know, so, but the imagery on these is completely different because it's all based around herbs. And this guidebook is wonderful at describing the imagery that they're using on these different cards. But for a beginner, it's a little more difficult to use them unless you're coming at tarot with a strong herb knowledge, especially healing herbs or how you can use herbs in witchcraft, like the herbal correspondences. Then you'd have kind of a jumping off point for using a deck like this, because you would have those associations with the herbs, which you could then use to progress forward. But if you're going right into this, it may be a little harder to learn. The next deck we have is the Green Witch Tarot. And this is going back to a very similar style to Rider Waite Smith decks. So we have the King of Pentacles, but we've got more witchy terminology. So we've got the Totems, we've got the Queen of Wands, here's the High Priestess, a little bit different imagery, but still very similar. We've got chalices instead of cups. Here is the Lord of Shadows, the Grim Reaper, Death card. We've got nature. We've got, so there's a whole bunch of different, here's the Standing Stone. There's a lot of different terminology used, but still very interesting imagery and lots of symbolism within the imagery. Here's the Moon card. I find this deck kind of crosses over the border of being Rider Waite Smith. Like, you can see there's some inspiration, but it's not the same. You're not going to be able to use a guidebook from a Rider Waite Smith deck, and you won't necessarily be able to apply it to this. But I feel like this is also close enough that, like the 8 of a Thames here, the 8 of Swords, very similar imagery in this card. So some of these cards have some crossover, some of them don't. Wheel of the Year, very similar imagery to a couple different decks. Symbolism, not imagery, but the symbolism used. Here we have the Crone, which I love. I love this. This is the Strength card. It's the Crone, but still very similar imagery with the lion, right? So this deck kind of blends both worlds, but so you can kind of use Rider Waite Smith knowledge to read this deck, but there's also so much more. So this could be a beginner-friendly deck if you wanted to put in just that little bit extra work. But again, this also has tons of imagery, so tons of messages just come through the imagery. And then the last deck is the Animal Totem Tarot. And this is very similar lines to the Green Witch Tarot, where it kind of has similar imagery, but also very different. So we have the 5 of Cups, and obviously this is all animal themed. 6 of Pentacles. Here's the Strength card. So very different. I mean, you can definitely tell that this is talking about strength, especially physical strength. But very different imagery. We have the Magician here with the Fox. We have the Eight of Cups, the Chariot. Interesting use of the Chariot with the Orca because, while you might not look at this and think that it's very similar, but a lot of the imagery with the Chariot in the Rider Waite Smith is the contrast between the black and the white, which is very much what an Orca is. So, very interesting symbolism used in these cards. Like the Temperance card in the Rider Waite Smith deck, it's a woman with 1 foot in the water, 1 foot on the land. Here we have a flamingo with 1 foot in the water, 1 foot up in the air. But there's, again, similar with the rainbow, and just there's a lot of overlap, but still very different in its own sense. I love this deck. I find that this deck is also very easy to read, but I also do love animals, and I love the messages that animals can bring us. So depending on your perspective, your interest, and just what kind of artwork you might want to have, you might want something more realistic, you might want something more dramatic, you might want something with more muted tones, or something very bright and cheerful. Depending on what you want, there are so many different decks available to you. And in terms of finding what deck is right for you, I would literally start with the deck that you think is pretty, the deck that you find visually stimulating, that draws your attention, a deck that you like the theme of, a deck that you like the artwork of, the color palette that they've used. You can see that these decks have very varying color palettes, right? We have very dark decks, we have very earth-toned decks, and then we have decks like the Wisdom Seeker's Tarot, the Herbcrafter's Tarot, and the Rider Tarot, which are actually quite bright and colorful. So it depends on what your personal aesthetic is, what you are drawn to. There's no right or wrong deck, but there are going to be decks that are easier than others. So if you're brand new to tarot, I would suggest something based on the Rider Waite Smith deck. It doesn't have to be exactly this imagery. Like I showed you, like there's other decks that have very similar themes, but completely different imagery. So really look at the different decks. You can look at different pictures. You can look at different reviews. Again, I have reviews for all of these, and there's a lot of people on YouTube that show the decks. I don't like to show every card because, for one thing, that's against copyright, but also it's just, you know, sometimes you like to be surprised with what you get. You can also just watch other tarot readings, and sometimes you're just drawn to a certain deck, a certain card. That's how I've gotten a few of my decks. It's just like, what deck? Not so much with tarot, but with my oracle cards. It was like, what deck is that? I need that deck. So a lot of readers will have down in the description box, they will have links to the decks that they use, or at least the title of the decks that they use. And so you can go find out what they're looking at, because sometimes you just see a beautiful deck and you want it. And that's how my collection has grown so big. It's because I just saw pretty things and I wanted them, and there's nothing wrong with that. So whether you are intuitively connected with a deck, or whether you just think it's pretty, or if it has a theme that you like herbs or witchcraft or animals or Halloween, you know, you don't need to justify or explain your decision to anyone. You don't even have to know why you like it. You can just like it. So the best tarot deck for you is one that you just like. But again, depending on how difficult you want to make things for yourself, starting off with something like the Antique Anatomy Tarot might be a little more difficult than starting with the Rider Tarot. But if that's where you are drawn and that's where you want to go, you can definitely have this as your first tarot deck, just as you can have this as your first tarot deck. Actually, none of these were my first tarot decks. My first tarot deck was, I believe it was called the Eden deck. I lost it in a flood 15 years ago. And I mean, I would love to have that deck back, but I found one on Amazon, or not on Amazon, in eBay, and it was like $500, and I'm not spending $500 on an old, out-of-print, used deck. I'm just not. So anyways, none of these are my first decks, and the reason I bought that deck was because it had a gorgeous tiger on the cover of it. So you just buy what you feel drawn to, what you feel connected to, and if it works for you, great. If not, you can always try a different deck. But that, if you have any other questions about how to choose a tarot deck, let me know down in the comments below. And I will talk to you guys next week with the same kind of video, except for about oracle cards and how to choose the oracle deck that is right for you. So I have even more oracle decks than I have tarot cards, so that'll be fun. I'll see you next week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I hope you have a fantastic day. Love, light, and happiness to all of you. Bye.